Mayors of U.S. cities have reacted with outrage as President Donald Trump signed an order to block funding to municipalities that refuse to report undocumented immigrants. The mayors said they are prepared for a protracted fight against the decision. The officials added that they would defend all people regardless of where they come from. Trump's order targeted the so-called sanctuary cities and counties, which generally do not comply with federal requests to detain undocumented immigrants. The order claims that shielding the immigrants causes immeasurable harm to the American people. Nearly 500 jurisdictions are likely to fall under the order, including New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Chicago, as well as smaller cities. To discuss that, we're now joined by Dennis Small, who is with Executive Intelligence Review, and he's joining us live now from Leesburg. Mr. Small, how do you feel about this order by President Trump to cut funding to these cities?
Well, President Trump is making a mistake on the way he's approaching the problems of drugs, terrorism, and job loss, i.e. what he's presenting as the immigration issue. This is a mistake, but the bigger mistake he's making is his nominee for the Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin. And I'll explain exactly what I mean. The General Kelly, who is head of Homeland Security, has himself said that simply building a physical wall on the border with Mexico is not going to solve the problems of drugs, of terrorism, and of job loss, because there's an underlying economic issue which is driving this problem forward. The actual wall that does need to be built is between speculative banking and commercial productive banking in the United States by returning to the Glass-Steagall law of Franklin Roosevelt. If that law existed, first of all, it would dry out the financing of the drug trade. You can't stop the drug trade by just throwing the local drug runners in jail. You have to stop the financial support for this, which is coming from Wall Street and the City of London. Secondly, that will stop the financing of terrorism, which is directly related to the drug trade. And third, you create the economic conditions where, jointly with Russia and China and the other countries of the BRICS, you can get true economic development going. It does not work to say that the problem is that jobs were shipped to Mexico or China or elsewhere. That's not the problem. The problem is the gigantic speculative bubble of $2 trillion in derivatives, which would be dried out by the drug trade. Mnuchin, who has been named as Treasury Secretary, has stated explicitly that he is opposed to returning to Glass-Steagall. And furthermore, he's financially allied with George Soros, who is the world's leading financier of illegal drugs, and incidentally has helped finance many of the demonstrations against President Trump. So although I understand and agree that the approach on immigration being taken is wrong at this point, and it will not work and will only cause social conflict, if you want to actually solve the problem, what you have to go at is the underlying issue, which is the Glass-Steagall law, and Trump would be wise to look at Steve Mnuchin and his connections to George Soros and fire him even before he hires him.
So where will this all end up, Mr. Small? As you alluded to in your first answer there, this will bring up obviously issues of racism, xenophobia, et cetera, because this does go after a very key section of those who live in the United States, doesn't it?
Sure, it definitely does. And under conditions of an economic collapse like the one that we are living in now, or the one which the banking system has imposed on Greece or on Italy or other countries of Europe, under those conditions, xenophobia will take off because people will be fighting for smaller and smaller pieces of a shrinking pie. There is no solution unless you solve the economic problem of making the pie bigger. Look, the United States is a melting pot society. We were built on the idea that immigrants were welcome. But the only way that that will work is if they are welcomed to upgrade their skill set in a growing, expanding economy. The United States under Trump would be wise to accept the offers and proposals from China, for example, to cooperate on massive infrastructure development, the New Silk Road project, and helping the United States reconstruct the terrible infrastructure deficit that we have. But that will not happen so long as Wall Street remains in the driver's seat with its gigantic speculative bubble with people like Steve Mnuchin. If we go back to Glass-Steagall and the Franklin Roosevelt policies, then we can eliminate the basis underlying of the xenophobia, the racism, and so on, which is in fact a very real danger unless we stop the Wall Street policies.
Okay, Mr. Small, we'll leave it there at that. But of course, as always, we appreciate you taking your time and to share your insight with us here at Press TV.
My pleasure.
Chicago is a sanctuary city, and Mayor Rahm Emanuel says that will not change. But President Trump is threatening to turn off the federal spigot for any city that refuses to cooperate on people in this country illegally. Senior correspondent Mike Tobin has that story tonight from Chicago.
The president's executive order squares him off with the mayor of the nation's third largest city because of what it does.
Cracks down on sanctuary cities.
Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel needs minority support for his political survival. As he did shortly after the election, Emanuel vowed that Chicago will remain a so-called sanctuary city. The crackdown means certain federal grants will become unavailable for the cash-strapped city. But the mayor insists immigrants without legal status can remain safe, secure, and supported in the Windy City.
You are welcomed in Chicago as you pursue the American dream.
In light of Chicago's ever-increasing problem with gun violence, the president fired off a late-night tweet. If Chicago doesn't fix the horrible carnage going on, 228 shootings in 2017, with 42 killings, up 24% from 2016, I will send in the feds. It brought immediate rebuke from Father Michael Pfleger, an activist on the troubled West Side.
We do not need, though, feds on our streets. We don't need National Guard. That's suppression.
Illinois Congressman Luis Gutierrez accused the president of exploiting the pain of the people in the troubled communities for political gain.
We have a particular problem in the city of Chicago. We need particular solutions, not a president on Twitter.
The tweet seemed directed at Emanuel. The mayor responded diplomatically, saying if the Fed can send resources to deal with the violence, Chicago will take them.
I would welcome, always have, welcome federal participation in working with local law enforcement to dealing with guns and gangs.
Softening the tone of the president's communication, White House spokesman Sean Spicer said this is about the federal government pitching in to solve the city's problem.
No American, whether or not you live in Chicago or Nebraska, shouldn't feel like you can walk down the streets of a city in this country and fear for your life. And I think too often that's happening in Chicago.
Emanuel and the president have met in person since the election. According to the mayor, the discussions were cordial and productive. However, when the conversation happens over just about every other form of media, the gloves seem to come off. Chris?
Mike Tobin reporting from Chicago. Mike, thank you.
The mayors of U.S. cities have reacted with outrage as President Donald Trump signed an order to block funding to municipalities that refuse to report undocumented immigrants. The mayor said they are prepared for a protracted fight against the decision. The officials added that they would defend all people regardless of where they come from. Trump's order targeted the so-called sanctuary cities and counties which generally do not comply with federal requests to detain undocumented immigrants. The order claims that shielding the immigrants causes immeasurable harm to the American people. Some 400 jurisdictions are likely to fall under the order, including New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Chicago, as well as smaller cities. To discuss that, we're now joined by Dr. Frank Emsbach, who is a political commentator, and he's joining us live now from Madison via Skype. Dr. Emsbach, how do you feel about the reactions, of course, of those mayors, and to begin with, even President Trump's such executive order?
Following. For those who know about American history, in 1859, 1860, we had the Fugitive Slave Law, and cities throughout the country stood up to the federal government and refused to, capture slaves. So there was this huge resistance, and I see the same thing. And unfortunately, that was, of course, the beginning of the Civil War. Legally, under the federal laws as they exist today, the federal government cannot take money away from one program in order to force compliance with another. So there's a whole legislative issue here that's going to happen. Secondly, this is like an attack on the major economic drivers of this country. The cities are the source of growth here. And so to suddenly start attacking them in the middle of this makes no sense. But it does resemble the ideas in 1920 when rural America attacked the cities and put in prohibition with the attendant criminal disasters that occurred. So what we have here is a backward-looking and probably unenforceable but terribly disruptive series of ideas. And maybe he's going to do it. But there's no way from an economic or a legal point of view that this can be implemented as he said it would be. So it's a disaster.
Dr. Armstrong, we have about a minute left. I'm wondering, obviously many Trump supporters would like such a move on his part. What does that say about how divided then the United States is at this point and the sorts of xenophobia / racism that exists there?
Well, it says a lot. First of all, President Trump lost the popular vote on the East and West Coast. And a lot of the cities that are targeted are on the East and West Coast. So, you know, it's sort of like retribution against people who voted against him. In terms of the other things, xenophobia and whatnot, all this does is it increases the xenophobia, the anti-Muslim, the anti-Hispanic, feelings in this country, bearing in mind that the largest number of illegal entries to this country come via the current system where people come legally and then overstay their visa. It's not that people are climbing walls or something from Mexico. And so the whole premise of these programs is xenophobic, it's pointless, and all it does is it drives up internal political divisions here. There is no way that this kind of program attacking the majority of Americans, because most Americans live in cities here, and the 300 cities that we're talking about, encompass a good deal, if not 60 or 70% of the population. So you have a system where the president has gone out and announced that he is going to go after the fiscal ability of a majority of this, where the majority of the citizens live. So this is a very divisive and potentially unconstitutional effort.
Okay, Dr. Armstrong, we'll leave it there at that point. But of course, as always, we appreciate you sharing your insight with us here at Press TV.